Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I am your host, Joe JDF, and don't forget to like and subscribe to any of my past videos that you've seen and enjoyed, or recommend to your friends. Now, on to today's episode, where today we'll be discussing a movie franchise that I think was underrated for its time and gained popularity afterward. But today, I have to agree with certain people would not be made, given what it does. And that is the franchise known as Porky's. Now, this franchise ran from 1981 until the most recent one that they made was in 2009, which is only 4 films, though. The first film debuted in 1981, and the cast included Dan Monahan as the character of Pee Wee, a perpetual virgin who was just out to get laid. Mark Harrier as the character of Billy. White Knight as Tommy Turner, aka the brains of the group, who was always thinking and coming up with ways. Roger Wilson as Mickey. Cyrus O'Reilly as Tim. And Tony Granos as the character known as Meat, who got his name for a certain region of his body. The character of Mickey by Roger Wilson was an interesting one because of how it was done. But the scene for this, anyways, continuing the cast, I'll get to the scene when I get to the plot. Also on the list is Khaki Hunter as Wendy, a woman who gives Pee Wee a lot of trouble in the movies, but he gives back just as much. Nancy Parsons as Eugenia Ballbricker, the girls' gym coach, and she's completely strict and crazy. If you saw Matilda, the principal, Eugenia would bear somewhat of a nature to her in the first one. Scott Columby as Brian Schwartz, a Jew during the time of the movie, a Jewish person during the time of the movie, which wasn't necessarily a good thing for the time it was set in. Chuck Mitchell as the character of Porky, who owned the nightclub of the title name, and was known to have this cruel attitude. And Alex Karras as Sheriff Wallace. But the plot of the first film is in 1954. A group of high school Florida friends decide to help their friend lose his virginity, but they end up in a war with a sleazy nightclub owner and his corrupt redneck sheriff brother. I did not write the part about it being a redneck. When I looked it up on IMDb, it listed him as being redneck. So before you start writing in that I'm being stereotypical and things like that, keep that in mind. And along the way, they also deal with racism and high school hijinks in general in the movie, such as Meat not getting into college and not getting into the college he wants and getting drunk over it in public. And when the cops go to ask about it, one of them, one of the friends actually comes up with the idea of big thinking for, hey, his girlfriend left him. What would you do if your girl left you? And the cop's answer is actually, his woman left him, he'd drink for joy. Yeah. Now, during this movie, it's also noteworthy that the first three films, when they came out, were all rated X in Ireland, supposedly. I couldn't get this verified, but it's the rumor I found on two or three sites. But again, it was originally rated X in Ireland. They were originally rated X in Ireland and then dropped to a 16 rating, despite the fact that they had an 18 rating. In the US, this would have been like going from giving it an X rating to dropping it to the PG-13 rating, despite having the R rating and the NC-17 rating that we have. Okay, so now some more notes about it. Before doing Police Academy or Mannequin, Sex in the City, Kim Cattrall's actually in this movie as a character known as Miss Honeywell, who has a nickname as Lassie. And there's a reason behind this. And when it's revealed, it's wrong, but at the same time, to me, it was funny in the way it was wrong. The material for this movie was gained over a 15-year period by the writer director um, Bob Clark. He used incidents of males from his generation, along with a few of his own personal memories. And the film was a box office hit, despite being panned by critics. And Siskel and Ebert called it one of the worst films of 1982. Even though the film was released in 1981, but still. And Bob Clark, the writer-director, on the 2006 DVD commentary, states he felt closest to Pee-wee and Tommy. The others were based on friends or people he went to school with, and including when he was in college, or just friends he had afterwards. Um, the movie spent 8 weeks at the top for me in 1982, only to be topped by E.T., the extraterrestrial, starring Drew Barrymore at such a young age which spent 16 weeks at number one. Howard Stern tried to produce a reboot many times, but the studio wouldn't allow it, despite the fact that Stern had the blessing of Clark. Also, there's a scene with a prostitute in this movie where it's a joke set up in order to screw with the other guys. Well, when they do this, it shows on VHS, Betamax, and Laserdisc. The nudity on it is shown longer than it was on DVD or on the original theatrical release. There's barely any to it in the original and the DVD, and there's more focus on the comedy in the scene. If you go on YouTube, watchmojo.com, has this as the number 8 movie on the list of movies that could never be made today, which came out uh, this year in 2020. Okay, now for my final on the first film. The good thing about it was it had a good runtime. The jokes and the humor were very high school natured, fitting with the set of the movie. The bad, it more than likely doesn't hold up to the standards of the current time, which is why it wouldn't get produced, like Watch Mojo said. And the soundtrack or music to it doesn't really stand out. So my final grade, because I had to mark off on the film, still actually puts it pretty high with a B plus. Now for the 1983 movie Porky's 2, The Next Day, which came out in 1983, and the cast is pretty much the same. Only you don't have Porky, you don't have the sheriff, Honeywell, and one of the men's coaches from the first one. Okay, now the plot for this one is that while getting ready for a Shakespeare festival, the school comes under attack from a purity in books group because they say that Shakespeare was corrupt with sexual nature and a lot of things. They basically go off on a big purity spree about it. And that also, while that's happening, you got the KKK who's mad, and you got the KKK who's mad because a Seminole Indian was Seminole. Sorry, I'm not sure if Native American or Indian should be added to the end of that, so I'll just take that back and say Seminole was cast in the lead of Romeo and Juliet, and corrupt politicians who are trying to keep their job because so many are saying that if they let it go, they're going to vote against them in the next election. Now for the notes. The rumor is they didn't want to, the studio didn't want to make a Christmas story, which, while I'm not a fan of, my father is an absolute fan of. But they allowed it so that Bob Clark would make a sequel to the original, would make this movie as a sequel to the original Porky's. Also, there's considered to be a reference to A Christmas Story in this movie for the fact that during the festival, plot, spoiler alert here, um, during the fight on stage when they're doing one of the plays, one of the swords breaks, and they end up throwing a leg on stage that has a red shoe on it. According to some people, this is a reference to A Christmas Story where they had the lamp, the famous leg lamp that has the stockings, which also got in trouble over that leg, saying that it was too sexualized, which I find interesting in that fact. Because who thinks of the leg with the stocking as a lamp being sexualized? That's like you're just trying to find something to complain about in it, in my view. Director Bob Clark actually makes a cameo in this one as one of the Klan members, which to me could say that he was actually in some way protesting the movie. though that probably isn't what he was doing. But it's just a nice, but rather it's a cameo that some people don't do that he chose to do back then. Now, TV versions show a different part of the conversation being played when the recorder is played at a rally where the preacher who's doing truth through scripture or something like that, as he called it. But basically, he was one of the people protesting the festival because of Shakespeare having the kissing scenes and certain other aspects of it. And now for my final on Porky's 2. Good. It continues the high school adult humor from the first. 2. It shows the issues of racism and corruption that were known to be happening during the time and still even continue to the current day. Though some people may not be willing to say so. Now for the bad. Same as the first, it wouldn't be made. And despite the name and implication of the movie, there is no appearance of Porky or his establishment in this movie. Now, my final grade for this one, it doesn't get big drop, but it does drop, and it drops to a B minus. Now for the third series in the film, Porky's Revenge from 1985. The cast is the same minus the minor characters from the previous film, and you get the return of Porky. And the plot for this one is that as graduation nears, Porky returns to get revenge on the Angel High Boys, which is the school that the kids attended. This time, by getting them in the habits where they're going to have to throw the basketball championship and threatening their coach if they don't. Um, some notes about this. The actress who played Wendy, this was her final theatrical appearance before quitting the movie industry. This is also the only entry in the trilogy, in the original trilogy, to not have a paperback release. And it would technically not be the final film in the series, as Pimpin' Pee-wee would be released in 2009. To me, this one is what should have been where they stopped at. And it's real, and the year of release in it is released exactly 30 years after the film takes place. So it would have been the characters' 30-year high school reunion. And unlike previous entries in the film, this one, when it gets to the end credits, uses screenshots from the film rather than having an extended type ending during the credits. The final, it kept the humor consistent. It actually has Porky and his establishment make their return. It was a good end to the series, or so we thought until they made the new one. To me, it was a good ending to the series. And 4, it has a memorable song to make it for the series called, the song is High School Nights by Jim Edmonds. I recommend you look it up. It's actually very peaceful. And now the song, I could actually see being played today. and being very popular. Now for the bad. Again, wouldn't be made, and the story didn't really focus on the students or Porky, but on the basketball game they were expected to lose or throw, which is odd because you figure it would have looked on the aspects more for that to make it happen as they got ready to go into it. Now, my grade for this, because it did it this way, and I couldn't really give it that much credit, I give it a C. Now, for the final movie in the franchise, or at least as we stand at the time being, Porky's Pimpin' Pee Wee. This movie came out in 2009. It had a completely new cast, and the plot for this is, but the interesting part is that even though it's got a new cast, it's the same characters supposedly. Here's the deal, though. The plot of the movie is that after destroying a house during one of their parties, Huey and the gang end up starting a business, gaining the attention of Porky as they work to get the money. They end up in a rivalry against him during it. Now, some notes about this. Like I said, this movie's supposed to be a sequel to the original trilogy, but it's clearly set in the present as it uses flat screen TVs, modern clothing, and cell phones. Which, to me, when I watched it originally, made me think it was actually a different rule that they had, and instead was like the next generation of them, where it's like one of Pee Wee's nephews or something in it. Movie night spoofs. Movie night, the company that made this movie, spoofs logos of companies at the beginning of the film. Uh, Good. I couldn't really find anything good about this, except maybe you got some. Um, since this movie does show a lot of nudity, because it's got adult film stars in it, and they're using internet webcams and things like that to do sales, that they actually got some professional actors, such as Christine Noog, and I can't pronounce her last name, but they got like certain actresses on that side of the business, on the adult film industry, to be in this movie. That's the only good thing I could find with the idea of how they did this movie. Bad, it was an unnecessary film to be made, and the humor was lost from the first three films. It was non existent. And so, because of that, this thing gets dropped so low, and I do not recommend it for another watching. Overall, I give this film an F, and just say, slice its throat. Now, if at some point in the future they decide to do another film, such as a reboot or try to remake the original trilogy, I might be interested. But no, do not continue off of this particular film, off of Pimpin' Pee Wee, if you expect to make a survival rate. If you are playing that, then let the series die there and rest in peace of what little peace it can. The first three, they may not be, like I said, the first two may not have a great soundtrack. The third one has a great song for it, but not a great story. I mean, but doesn't do as much focus on the characters as the first two did. So with this one, and so with the first three though, I could recommend that you watch them over and over. But like I said, Pimpin' Pee Wee, not worth it. You can kill it and just skip over it. Now, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I look forward to the next time I do one, and hopefully you'll send me your recommendation at some point.